Everyone has a story, and I believe that sharing your story has the power to connect people. I'm a working mom, wife, and seeker, and nothing lights me up and brings me more joy than having meaningful conversations. And one of the things I love to talk about is psychedelics. In December 2021, I experienced my first psychedelic journey with psilocybin. It was one of the most profound events in my life, and it opened me up to a deeper spiritual growth and helped me to heal. And now, talking to those who've experienced the therapeutic magic of psychedelics and hearing about their personal journey has become my passion. Mindful Trip is a safe space to have conversations that demystify and destigmatize the use of plant medicines. Conversations that allow us to have deeper connections with ourselves and others. I hope that sharing these intimate, funny, and inspiring stories helps you find the answers you're looking for. A wise friend said to me, "All you can do is follow the threads and see where it takes you." So I hope you'll join me in unraveling the threads, staying open, and trusting the journey. This is Mindful Trip. Mindful Trip content and the views, thoughts, and opinions of the host, guests, and contributors is for informational purposes only and is not intended to be a substitute for professional legal advice or medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Consult with the medical provider or mental health care professional about your health-related questions. Mindful Trip does not encourage illegal activity, including but not limited to the illegal sale, purchase, or use of controlled substances. Hi, and thanks for joining. Today, my guest Thomas Westenholz shares how a life-changing psilocybin experience led to self-discovery, helped him gain a new perspective on his son's health issue, and his holistic approach to balancing science and spirituality. Thomas Westenholz is a dedicated psychedelic facilitator with the rich tapestry of training and expertise to guide transformative experiences. He's trained as a breathwork and ecstatic dance facilitator and is certified in somatic trauma therapy and couples therapy. His mission is to provide safe and practical support for people who want to use psychedelics to improve their mental health or expand their consciousness. Your support means a lot, so please subscribe, download, and share with friends and family. I'd also love to hear what resonates for you, so send me your comments. Hi, Thomas.
Hey, it's great, Minley, to see you again today.
Oh, it's so nice to see you as well. Thanks so much for doing this. I really appreciate your time.
I'm really excited about this conversation and just see where it takes us. We'll go with the flow.
Me too, me too. So let's start off. Tell me what I need to know about you to understand what led you to begin exploring psychedelics for therapeutic use.
So that's a big story, so it might take a while, but I think what led me into psychedelics was a very personal exploration. So yes, I can throw around all these credentials. I'm trained in X, Y, and Z, psychedelic facilitation, couple therapist, but that's not really what it's about.
Mhm.
And I think at the core, we're human beings, right? Even though we love these titles. And it's rare I found that people go into this space without having had some kind of experience that profoundly impacted their lives. Because otherwise, why would you, right? It's an area that's very much in the gray zone. It's just not where most people want to play. But I think it's 12 years ago now, my beautiful little boy was born with a life limited condition. And we were told that he wouldn't make it, that he wouldn't survive. He is now the first child in the world to have survived being born with no shortcut at all. And they spoke to hospitals in the US. We were obviously here with the leading hospitals in Europe and in the UK. And they were really baffled about what to do. So we lived with this daily threat of, is he going to be here tomorrow? Is he, what's going to happen? And yeah, I think it ended up causing me so many challenges that despite all my training, my knowledge, I could not really deal with, because I think there's something very overwhelming about the idea of having to bury your own child, right? that
Yes.
just doesn't fit with our natural biology. So I couldn't, and I was really struggling. I was developing insomnia, IBS, chronic headaches, you name it, pretty much every psychosomatic symptoms of PTSD,
Mm.
because I had chronic stress, right? Chronic overwhelm, didn't sleep at night. And I was also involved in stem cell research. So I helped put a team together that was working in 5 different countries. I fundraised millions of pounds for them, where we were, or are, trying to create organs from embryonic stem cells, or
Wow.
cells you can actually take from the skin, and then you re-engineer them back, and then we start creating organs. And that was obviously motivated by my son. And I think I was then led into this journey with psychedelics as a friend continued to say, maybe this would be beneficial
Mm.
to try and help you deal with some of these existential challenges about the idea of dying and what that even means,
Mm.
right? That obviously I couldn't. And then I did. I had two very, very profound encounters with psilocybin, which is an active component in magic mushrooms.
Mhm.
And I was so lucky and grateful, which often is strange for people to hear, that I got the experience of dying in one of these experiences and
Mm.
seeing my own body disintegrated. And as I looked at myself, because I was drowning in this experience, and I felt like I couldn't breathe. And my friend, who's a therapist, was there and just put his hand on me and said, "Your breathing is normal.
Mm.
Just surrender." Because
Mhm.
that's one of the challenges, right? Is we
Yes.
spend our whole life learning how to be in control,
Yes.
and suddenly and the idea of death is the opposite. It's a complete loss of any sense of control, right? And I felt I couldn't breathe, and he said, "Just let go and the fear will go." And I did. And then it literally felt, and I saw myself just drowning, and then my dead body was lying in the water, and I realized, oh, I'm not my body anymore. And I felt this complete sense of calm. And what was fascinating for me was, even afterwards, I had taken that back. It doesn't mean I'm always calm, but I don't have this daily anxiety anymore.
Right.
My IBS went, my chronic headaches went, my insomnia went. And all these symptoms that otherwise have looked like they were untreatable, but often, I guess, was categorized as exactly that, right?
Mhm.
Treatment resistant, they like to call it, the professionals, which just means we don't have the right tools to help you,
Right.
essentially, right? But they like to blame the patient rather than take responsibility and say, we don't know what to do.
Right.
Um, and I think it just had such a profound impact on my life that somehow I felt compelled to see how that might be able to also help other people.
Mm. So I can't agree with you more. I absolutely feel Western culture has such a difficult time discussing death, having conversations about death, really exploring and really embracing death. I grew up with parents who were Buddhists. And so I grew up with the concepts of reincarnation and past lives. So, in a strange way, I never actually fear death. But I do feel as though that people don't want to have these conversations because it's very uncomfortable for them to think that at some point either they're going to pass or that somebody that they love is going to pass. And that sense of being out of
Yes,
control drives that fear. The truth is, the
yes.
only thing that we know for sure is that we're all actually going to die. That is a given. We just don't know when or how it's going to happen. I think it's so interesting that you experience that ego death in your psilocybin journey because there are a lot of people who do talk about experiencing the ego death and how it profoundly changes their view of this 3D reality and also what is potentially next after you pass into the next dimension. So, for you, coming from a very scientific background, how did you reconcile the two polar opposites of thinking of the scientific way and then now having this new viewpoint after this magic mushroom journey?
You know what? I actually think they're very much aligned, but there's also limitations to what we can measure in science, right? So
Mm.
science is always going to be slower at catching up.
Right,
That is simply the essence of that, right? So I think they align very much. And Einstein even said that energy can't turn into nothing,
right,
right? And that in itself says that we cannot suddenly disappear. Consciousness cannot suddenly disappear. It's simply, and that in itself, even though we can't measure it, you know, it cannot suddenly turn into nothing. That just wouldn't make any sense,
right,
right? And
right.
mathematically, that is also correct and true. So in that way, science does align, even though we don't have instrument to measure it. But we could also say, go back 50 years
Right.
and we couldn't measure what we can measure today when we can look at what psychedelics does to the mind, right? look at the guy who said that women were dying from fatalities in hospitals
Mhm.
because there was something invisible called bacteria.
Right.
Well, they all called him crazy back then, right? I think they even sent him to an institution
Right.
until we found out. Nowadays, we're like, oh, he wasn't crazy. He was an innovator.
Right.
And he realized that if we washed our hands on the instrument, then not so many women would die
Mhm.
during childbirth.
Mhm.
But back then, they thought he was crazy because he was talking about something we couldn't see.
Right.
Right. And I think part of that experience just taught me also the limitation of the five senses that we have that only allow us to measure. And even through science, I can only measure and experience through science what these five senses allow me to measure and
Mm.
experience. Right. And it's like somebody who's blind saying color doesn't exist. Are they right? Are they wrong? Well, it doesn't exist to them because they can't perceive it. So in that way, that's true. But that doesn't mean it doesn't exist, because to somebody who have the ability to perceive that, it does exist, right? So I think there's just this embracing humility that I didn't have before. I think
Mhm.
before I was slightly arrogant in a way. I know about science. I know better. Other people don't know. Now I feel much more humble in the fact of understanding the benefit of science, but also the utter limitations that will always be there
Right.
with any scientific method, right? And I feel that's something that also came back from the experience was this flexibility of mind.
Mm.
My connection with nature has changed, right? I suddenly crave to be in nature. It's almost like it awakened you to something else. And I'm not going to comment whether we have more lives or not, because I don't know.
Mm.
What I do know is that it doesn't end with the physical body, leave this planet and had enough. I know that doesn't end, but what comes after, I don't know. But all I can say is from my experience, and many people had similar experience, there is actually a sense of complete calm and peace.
Mm.
And it makes sense because the only purpose of the fear response, which is what makes us fearful, anxious, etc., is to maintain the physical body.
Right.
Its only purpose is to look out for things that could compromise the physical
Right.
body, right? So when there is no physical body anymore, it kind of makes sense that, of course, there also is no fear and anxiety anymore.
Right. I know it's that fear that prevents you from feeling completely safe in this physical 3D reality and this, I call it the meat suit that we're saddled with in this human incarnation. So for you, it's kind of straddling both the scientific world and also the more spiritual, esoteric world. How has that changed you in terms of combining that now when you do your work?
I think so. One thing actually in some of the stem cell research, which is so utterly fascinating, and even the smartest mind on this planet cannot fully explain why this happens. And what they saw was, as they were trying to prime and control the genetic code of the cells, some of the cells would constantly turn into cancer.
Mm.
And we could not figure out why, how this would happen. Why a lot of them did what they were meant to do, but some of them turned into cancer.
Mm.
But then if you put them in the right environment, the organism in the right environment and on a skeleton, it knows what it's meant to turn into, and they knew what organs to turn into. And we cannot explain to you why, just like I can't explain to you how the neurons know its way through trillions of brain cells but somehow connect to the back of your brain where
Right.
this vision center is,
Right.
and somehow you can see it. It literally is magic. I cannot explain to you how the cells inside the womb of your mother, they somehow know, I have to turn into an eye, I have to turn into a heart.
Yes.
This is still part of the magic of creation that we don't fully know. And I'm okay with that we do not understand. We can't explain all of it. But what I did learn was two things. One, that if an organism is in the wrong environment, it will deteriorate.
Mm.
Like put a tree in a bad place or put a flower where it doesn't get any water, they will deteriorate and die. And all organisms are like that. Put them in an environment that's nurturing for them and they will restore balance. And humans is the same. So when I come back now and I look at all the mental health issues we have, even my own, but that I experience, but also for other people, it's so clear to me that we also have to look at the environment,
Right.
because we know that if you put the organism in the right environment, it flourishes.
Yes.
Then you don't need therapists. You don't need to go back and look at lots of trauma. It will automatically rebalance, which
Yes.
is so amazing. I think the second part for me, maybe even more profound, that to some extent can correlate between the spiritual and the science, was that I think my psychedelic experience taught me how to love.
Mm.
And before I would probably have told you that I loved my children, and I did, but there was also always an inhibition because there was also a fear of losing him, right?
Mm.
That kind of also was holding me back. And I guess we always have this with people in general in our life, whether it's a partner, a
Right.
parent, there's always this, oh, at some point I might lose them, right? That hold us back. And I realized for me that the environment that love requires is safety.
Mm.
And we often think love is excitement because that's what we are taught, especially around romantic love. And I think when I came back, I couldn't look at love the same way anymore.
Mm.
I realized the breathing ground for love to flourish is not excitement,
Mm.
it is safety.
Mm. I agree with you on that. I think the nature of love and unconditional love is that you can only fully open your heart and open yourself up and be completely vulnerable with true intimacy with somebody else, whether it's romantically or on a friendship or a family level, is really truly feeling safe enough to be your authentic self. That's really what it is to fully be your authentic self and to be able to love people the way you want to love them and also in return want to be loved. I feel like that's kind of the eternal quest for all of us is this hero's journey and heroine's journey is this vision quest is we're all searching for that feeling and for that experience as well. So you did these two psilocybin journeys. Did you delve into any other forms of plant medicine or psychedelics after you had these two really profound experiences?
You know, I didn't have the need for it. And
Mhm.
I think each individual will know what medicine is calling them. And it was actually very clear for me, which again, I cannot explain to you scientifically, but I was never called. There's other things that are very popular, like ayahuasca at the moment is something that's quite popular, etc.
Right.
But it never called to me. And people asked me many times. My friend also said, if this is something you want, I know places to. And I said, no, it just was not calling me. Something about the mushroom and the rawness, you can literally go out, there's fields in the UK where they grow and you can take it from nature, and that connection with nature was what really called me. And I'm not saying there's a right or wrong, like some people can achieve great results doing in safe environment things like LSD. I know people who had extraordinary outcomes and healed in beautiful ways, so it's not about one is better than the other. I think it's for people to listen. And maybe that's also one of the big lessons that I learned is coming back and listening again to the body, because we are so stuck in cognition, which
Right.
is what we learn from we're small, to try and analyze and think out logically what is the best. And there's nothing wrong. This is another survival strategy that we were given, and it's great. However, we have very much lost touch with listening to bodily signals, right? And I think one of my second psychedelic experience was so profound because, as I mentioned to you, at that point I had developed, IBS symptoms, etc., and also chronic headaches. And I just remember lying there,
Mm.
and there was this moment where I just asked my body, if you create headaches, because you create the chemicals, you have the receptors, so you are literally creating the perception of pain. And I had a huge headache while I took the psilocybin. And I said, then surely you can also just stop this. And my body was like, yeah, sure. And then I said, well, can you do it now? And my body was like, yeah, sure. And then literally my migraine was gone. And I'm not joking, like this. And it was incredible. And then I put my hand on my stomach and I said, well, if you create the IBS, because that's you attacking my own body, then surely you can stop it too.
Oh my god.
And my body was like, yeah, sure. And I said, could you do that? And I just felt this warmth
Mm.
spreading in my gut. Literally, it felt like really, really warm. And then it just came down. And as I said afterwards, I haven't had these IBS symptoms, and they were trying to treat me for years without anything working. And it has been gone. So it also really brought me back to this connection of talking and listening to the body, and not only trying to listen to logic, which I was before. I was so logical, everything had to be analyzed and now I would be much more likely to ask my body, how does this feel? Is this where you want to be? Is this a
Right.
person that feels good to be around? And I noticed that actually I found much more the environment that's nurturing for me in doing that, in
Mhm.
speaking to the body rather than with the logic.
Did you find after you had these two really, profound experiences with psilocybin, did you find any gifts came to the forefront? There's some people who, after they have a very profound near-death experience or spiritual awakening, they start to realize that they're clairvoyant or that they can sense things. So I'm just curious if anything came up for you, because it sounds like you really do have such a deep connection with your body that it's almost like there's a divine knowing about what's right and wrong, and you feel it in your body.
Yes. That's a really good question. And also, I think because often what happens when people take psychedelics or even other spiritual practices is often people talk about this idea of that they want ego death, right? Or they want to reach enlightenment, whatever it is. And I don't think for me that ever has been or ever will be what I'm striving to do.
Mm,
Because I actually think the ego is quite important to have in balance measured, because the ego is what make me turn to see if cars are coming on the street. The ego is what make me pay attention to whether I'm hungry and need to sleep.
right.
If I don't have an ego, I'm going to neglect this physical body. So there's also an acknowledgement that I needed. And the interesting thing was, in allowing to let go of my body and even the body dying, I gained much more connection with the body.
Mm,
So I think spirituality is so beautiful, but it can also often be used as a place to actually escape not having to be here, especially if people had a lot of trauma, right?
right,
Then spirituality can almost come a way to become disembodied and not having to feel the discomfort of being in this physical body.
right.
And I think for me, it's more about coming home and feeling the body more, because I think that we are having this physical experience so we can feel,
Mhm.
right? Because if we are just spirits floating around, then yes, we don't have suffering, but we also can't feel very much.
Yeah.
So for me, we're here to feel physically, emotionally, and having that experience. And that can obviously be pleasant or unpleasant. So I don't think I have any special gifts, because I guess some of the gifts you mentioned are very much about being highly, highly attuned to others, almost in full connection with that others, right?
Right.
And actually, while I want connection with others, I also recognize that part of what allowed me to have this felt experience is that I experience a sense of separation.
Mm,
And I embrace that that is part of how this experience will be. So I don't want to fully merge, if that makes sense,
right,
because that will happen anyway when I'm no longer here in physical form.
right.
So I'm not in a rush to get there. And it's beautiful that some people can do that, but it was never anything that was my intention. And I think the intention we set when we go into these experiences has a huge part of what actually also come out of them. And for me, it was never my intention that I wanted to have some special ability that I could use. It was actually that I wanted to come back
Mm,
and feel more, right? Because I think
mhm.
fear makes us disassociate often and feel less. I wanted to feel more.
I believe that the human experience, this physical experience, is really meant for us to feel the entire spectrum of human emotions. And I do think when you have that kind of disembodied experience where you are not completely connected to yourself, is when you start to have those feelings of depression and anxiety and a
Yes.
feeling of unworthiness, all those kind of more lower vibration feelings. So, how has your relationship with your family and your friends changed after you've had these experiences with psilocybin?
Well, I think they actually changed quite profoundly. And some people obviously have a way of being able to embrace that, but other people, it makes them feel more unsettled because they don't really know where they have you. But I think I was lucky in the way that even before, I had a lot of friends that were trained
Mm,
therapists and that were quite open minded and able to relate to change in that way. But I think it has changed very much in the way, particular, I think for me, is the allowing to receive. And we all have different things, right, that we've been shamed about growing up, depending on, our caregivers, our culture, all these elements obviously impact. But for me, there was very much this shame around that as a man, my job was to be a provider, but not to receive. And I really struggled a lot, I think, throughout life with this, because I would always get dissatisfied, which makes sense. Because if you only give energy and never get any, well, eventually you run dry, right? That is just the cycle of life. You
yes,
need to give energy and get energy, give energy again.
yes.
And I think I had this constant dissatisfaction in a lot of my friendship, even when it was romantic relationships. And that really changed. And again, I can't explain to you why. Nothing specific happened in the experience. But afterwards, it was just like coming back to being a more fluid organism again and coming back to what is just natural.
Mm,
And nature's way is that we need to receive and then give. We can't hold on to everything, meaning just receiving, receiving.
right.
right? But we also can't keep giving without getting anything in. Then we run dry.
Yes.
So I just came back to that natural cycle. And I guess that did change my dynamic because I started asking for more of what I wanted.
Mm,
And suddenly I didn't feel guilty about receiving it. You know, all these narratives that had been given to me just sort of dismantled this idea that as a man, you should never receive anything. You should only give,
right.
caretake. And it was not okay for me to get a cuddle, whatever it is, right?
Mhm.
And suddenly I felt that that was totally okay. And it even felt really good. So I think in that way, it did change how I relate to other people.
So interesting because I'm also going through being more open to receiving without feeling the guilt and the discomfort, because I think especially with women is that you are just so used to giving so much of yourself, your energy, your time, just everything, that it almost feels strange to receive from other people. And so that is really resonating, knowing that it's okay to receive. The ebb and flow has to be there. Otherwise, it just becomes completely stagnant. And you're really
Yes. Yes.
and you're really not doing yourself any favors. It does become detrimental to your own emotional and mental wellness to only be either giving or
Yeah.
receiving and not having that even exchange back and forth. So I definitely,
Absolutely.
yeah,
And even you're so spot on. And even in our everyday life, we drive around in our cars. If you drive in your car and you never go to the petrol station, well, eventually your car is just going to stop somewhere on the road and
right,
not go anywhere. And that's
right,
common sense to most of us, right?
right,
And yet we don't apply it in our own interpersonal relationships, right? We think that somehow when it's on the red, oh, I can keep going, I can keep
right,
going. And then we wonder why we suddenly collapse or relationship fall apart,
right.
right?
Or have
Well,
health
that's because we
issues.
kept driving when we should
Mhm.
have stopped. Yeah. And, I really think, again, why did this happen? I guess part of it was, as you talked about, the disintegration of not just the ego, but also the sense of identity,
Mhm.
meaning all these identities that had been given to me somehow. And it's hard to explain to people who haven't had it, but it's almost like I saw all of them forming a circle of who I was
Mm,
and impacting every choice I made throughout my life. And they just dismantled. And
mm,
suddenly I could see there was no fixed identity. And that might seem scary to some, but for me, there was a huge freedom in it of realizing this is just a construct.
mm,
And even the idea that I'm not allowed to receive is just a construct that my mind has created. And I could suddenly feel in my body that there was nothing real about this. And I remember I was laughing, I think, for 15 minutes
mm.
about the absurdity of the amount of suffering I and also many other people cause ourselves from believing that these narratives are true,
Right,
that we take them on. And I think in the dismantle of that, as it literally just fall apart, there was this freedom in coming back to what I think we organically are before we are socialized.
right. I know everything that you're saying, it just deeply resonates for me. Even you talking about IBS and just having the chronic headaches and the physical ailments before you did your psilocybin journey. I'm such a big believer in the whole mind body connection and that your body really does manifest whatever you are feeling internally. I think
Yes.
there's a disconnect between our bodies and our emotions. And I think there's a lot of people who are suffering from chronic issues and chronic ailments, and a lot of people with autoimmune issues. And I really do think at the core of it is really coming into full connection with who you are. And also, just like you said, the core of who you are, your emotions, and letting everything flow. But, it's always easier said than done. We're all works in progress and we're all on this journey. There's always something that we have to deal with. And the shadow work is some of the hardest work out there for sure.
Yes. Absolutely. But I think you're so spot on. And the fact is, I think most things today we categorize either as these psychosomatic illnesses or as different mental health conditions actually come back to the fact that we're not listening to the body.
Yes.
Because the fact is, it's us ignoring signals repeatedly again and again and again that cause chronic stress, that then start, of course, causing chronic headaches or IBS. There was this amazing research that they look at kids who had chronic cortisol, high level of
Mhm.
stress hormones, for long periods of time were much more likely to apparently develop IBS
Right.
also as adults. So again, it means chronic stress, obviously we know have this impact on the body. So it makes sense again if we don't listen to the fact that we are in stressful environments, which is actually the body saying, get out of here. I don't need you to be here. This is not good for you.
Mhm.
But if we ignore that, or if you're in a stressful job, or if you're a mother who never have time for your own needs, and these signals are being sent, but we keep ignoring them for whatever reason, right? Oh, I need the money, or I need to look out for my kids, or whatever the reason is, eventually there will be a price to pay, right?
Right.
Because what the body has to do is it has to turn up the signaling and saying, oh, he or she, or whatever your gender is not listening. So I'm going to turn it up a notch,
Mhm.
right? And that's when people end up, for example, coming into me for therapy and saying, oh, I have been identified with anxiety disorder.
Mm.
Well, guess what? There's pretty much always a pattern of not having listened to these internal signals for a long period of time until it became an anxiety disorder or IBS or whatever it is, which is a body screaming, listen to me. I need you to listen.
Yes. It's so true. I think we're all really good at ignoring those signs, the whispers and then the nudges. And then at some point, it's almost like a punch to the face where you can no longer ignore it anymore. And you really do have to pay attention to it and figure out a way to somehow release and process and heal. So, Thomas, for anyone who's potentially thinking or doing their own initial research into exploring psychedelics or plant medicines for their own spiritual or healing journey, what would be your advice for them?
What I would advise them, first of all, is reflecting on why do I want to do this?
Mhm.
Right? Because it's easy to be caught up in the excitement because there's a lot of news, a lot of research, and it's obviously coming back and becoming more popular now. So it's easy to just, oh, I want to try this because other people are doing it, right?
Right.
Just like you go outside class and you start smoking because your classmates are smoking. I guess the other pitfall we have to be aware of is this: I want to escape. This
Right.
is too painful. I need to escape, right? So I think it's being really mindful is why am I actually doing this? What is it I want? I had somebody call me up and say, oh, Thomas, can you help me on a psychedelic journey? I said, why? And
Mm,
she said, oh, I had a breakup and I feel sad.
mm,
I said, well, feeling sad after a breakup is very natural. And I don't think you need psychedelics to deal with
mhm,
that, frankly.
mhm,
I think you just need to go through a healthy grieving process.
mhm.
That just tells me you're a healthy human being.
Yeah.
If you're still sad 5 years later, then yeah, we might have to do something about it. But feeling sad a week after your partner that you lived with have broken up and left, that's natural.
Mhm.
And we don't need psychedelics. So it's asking, why am I doing this? Is this a way to just escape? Because I don't want to feel, because as you said very rightly before, one of the key differences between antidepressants and psychedelics is antidepressant numb emotion.
Yes.
Psychedelics makes you feel a lot more.
Yes.
So if you want to just avoid feeling well, then psychedelics is probably not a very good strategy,
Right.
right? Then the numbing strategies you already have, disassociation works much better.
Right.
And actually, you might end having a pretty terrifying experience in the way that you will feel more,
Mhm.
not less.
Mhm.
So I think the first thing is to clarify, then for people to go collect some information and be informed. Often there's this rush I found as well. People find, oh, I'm struggling, maybe this can help. And then they want to rush. I would say the opposite: slow everything down.
Yeah.
Slow it down, find the right people to do it with, because your experience is also hugely impacted, again, like we talked earlier, about your environment. Where does a flower blossom?
Mhm.
Well, your psychedelic experience is also hugely impacted on whether you have that right environment for you, which is different, right?
Right.
For me, it was being in nature. For me, it was being with one of my closest friends who I trusted dearly, that made me feel safe and who knew what to do if I got distressed,
Right.
right? That created the right environment for me to benefit hugely from these. But you can also go into an environment where you're with lots of strangers somewhere in the jungle, because I know retreats, in South America and places like this is very popular at the moment. You could be with complete strangers, and that could actually become very overwhelming. And I know people who come home from these retreats and struggle to stabilize for a couple of years,
Mm.
right? I just spoke to someone yesterday. So I would really say, make sure you're in an environment that feels safe for you, and where you feel safe with the people that are there, and preferably already know the people, or at least some of the people there.
Well, that's all really wonderful advice. I think just how everything is expanding in the world of psychedelics and plant medicines, I'll be very curious to see where it's headed in the next couple of years. I think things are moving very quickly because I do think that there is a serious need for people who are suffering from dire mental health issues. And of course, psychedelics and plant medicines aren't for everybody. But I do think that there are a lot of people who are really struggling and can potentially be helped by a plant medicine journey in some capacity. So you had mentioned that you also treat people. How can people get in touch with you if they wanted to reach out?
Yes, so I do work as a therapist. Of course, in the UK, we're not allowed to do it, but you can do it in the Netherlands, which is not that far from here. And hopefully will become legalized in the
Mhm.
next couple of years. I know it's moving quite quick in the US. So yeah, people can obviously go to my website and we can put the link maybe in the description, psychedelicmedicine.earth. But as I said, it's really about not rushing this. And I think you're right. There's enormous potential. But I really think there's two things we have to look at. And I turn a lot of people away, by the way, that I say this is not the right for you. I think that there's two key things. One is that, yes, psychedelics has enormous potential for expanding our consciousness, our awareness of self and others, and also deal with lots of mental health issues. And we also need to look at the environment people are living in and why they got to that place in the first place, right? Because if somebody takes a psychedelics and then go back to an environment that's really hostile for their organism, maybe a work where they're super stressed all the time and they don't enjoy, or a partner who screams and abuses them,
Right,
well, then eventually they're going to reset back to what the organism were before and feel pretty rubbish, right?
right.
So what I'm trying to say is we psychedelics has huge potential, but it's I call it a facilitator.
Mhm.
It doesn't do everything for you. It's because we have this culture very much. You go to the doctor, you pop a pill, right, and then you get better. And I don't want people to have this idea with psychedelics that, oh, I take a psychedelics and then Thomas said everything will be better.
Right,
You still have to look at what is your environment and is that conductive to you flourishing as a human being?
right,
Do you have the space that you need for you? Do you have a supportive partner?
right,
If you have an abusive partner, then yeah, maybe look at how can I get away from this and have a nurturing environment. If your job makes you feel miserable, then maybe also start looking before you do psychedelics.
right.
What can I do to move into something else that's more nurturing for me?
Right. And we're certainly not saying in any way that psychedelics is the be all or the end all. It's one tool, it's one modality that people can potentially explore and use to help them on this journey. But there's so many others that don't require plant medicines. It doesn't require any of this. I can't stress enough the set and setting, but then also the integration portion after the actual journey itself is equally, if not more important than the actual experience. That's something that I've
Yes.
gone through, but I know from all the people that I've spoken with and have had on the podcast, that is probably the number one advice from every single person is that the integration part after your journey is more important than anything else. It's something that I continually stress, and I know you obviously stress with your clients as well. So,
You're
Thomas,
so spot on.
yeah, thank you so much for your time. This has been such a wonderful conversation, and I really enjoyed getting to know you. And thank you so much for sharing your story. It's really inspiring, and you have such a beautiful, calm demeanor about you. You're just so measured and so balanced. I'm really looking forward to keeping in touch with you, especially as this plant medicine world explodes and begins to help all the people that need to be helped. So thank you again so much for your
Yeah.
time.
Oh, thank you so much for having me on. And it just really is an exciting time that we live in because I feel after quite a while of prohibition, we are coming back to a place now where we start embracing and taking it. Now I think it's for us to find ways to combining the spirituality with the science because it's becoming very science focused.
Mhm.
Like, of course, because we're trying to get approval and licensing, so it has to be.
Yes.
But I hope at some point we can come back to a bit more balanced perspective again
Mhm.
where we have both the scientific and the spiritual perspective. Because again, the science is important, it's great, but it also has shortcomings because all the science is only based on traditional therapeutic modalities, which is talk therapy, because that's
Right,
pretty much all we know in the West, right?
right.
And I really think we need to start looking at this much more holistically. How can we
Mhm.
create communities, as you said? How can people have integration circles? How can people use movement? Right? We need to start looking at this, I think, much more holistic.
Yes.
But it's a good start and it's very exciting time. So we'll see where it goes.
Well, I think you're definitely one of those people that will be on the forefront of it because of your scientific background, but then also your more spiritual, esoteric integration. You are very holistic in your approach to this journey. And anybody who is interested in reaching out to Thomas, all of his information will be in the episode notes. So I thank you again for your time. And I'm looking forward
Thank
to
you.
staying in touch with you.
Yeah, me too. It's been such a pleasure.
Take care.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Your support means a lot to me, so please subscribe, download, and share with friends and family. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on this episode, so let me know what resonates for you. Thanks so much for watching. Until next time, take care. Bye.